hypothesis that the unconscious is not merely a dark void.
In this section, C.G. Jung explores the radical hypothesis that the unconscious is not merely a dark void, but a multiple consciousness characterized by a vast field of fragmented awareness.
But a multiple consciousness characterized by a vast field of fragmented awareness. He bases this theory on the quasi-conscious state of certain unconscious processes and the nearly universal historical tendency to describe consciousness through the metaphor of light. By examining diverse esoteric and religious traditions, Jung identifies a recurring pattern where the human mind is depicted as a constellation of sparks rather than a single, monolithic sun. This imagery suggests that while the ego represents the primary light of our waking world, it is supported and surrounded by a hidden firmament of smaller, autonomous psychological functions that possess their own degree of luminosity. Jung finds significant evidence for this multiple consciousness in the writings of alchemists such as Gerhard Dorn, Heinrich Kunrith, and Paracelsus. These figures spoke of the lumen natura, or the light of nature, which they believed illuminated the human mind from within the physical and psychic darkness. Central to their philosophy was the concept of scintillae, divine sparks or soul sparks, that were seen as germinal points of light shining out from the unconscious. Jung interprets these alchemical symbols as sophisticated introspective intuitions that accurately captured the fragmented nature of the psyche before modern scientific terminology was available to describe it. The investigation extends into the realm of mystical visions in Eastern metaphysics, where Jung notes a striking consistency in the use of multi-eyed imagery to describe cosmic or divine consciousness. He cites the spiritual exercises of Ignatius Loyola, who experienced a recurring vision of a shimmering light that resembled a serpent covered in many eyes. Similarly, in Hindu tradition, the cosmic man, or Purusha, is often depicted as having 1,000 eyes, 1,000 feet, and 1,000 heads. Jung suggests that these images are not merely religious fantasies but are projections of the internal structure of the psyche, representing the polycentric nature of the unconscious where many small centers of perception coexist simultaneously. Ultimately, Jung concludes that these historical and cross-cultural descriptions of multiple luminosities correspond to empirical psychic phenomena. He asserts that the unconscious contains a multitude of tiny, conscious-like fragments that operate outside the ego's field of vision. This perspective transforms our understanding of the unconscious from a passive storage room into a vibrant, active landscape of little consciousnesses. By recognizing these hidden lights, we can better understand how the psyche manages to perform complex tasks, such as problem-solving in dreams or regulating deep emotional states, without the direct intervention of the conscious ego. Would you like to explore how these scintillae, or sparks of light, are related to Jung's concept of the self as the unifying center of the psyche? In this pivotal section of the collected works, C.G. Jung explores.
We're going into paragraph number 200 to 216 on the nature of the psyche, 7 patterns of behavior and archetypes.
The profound relationship between biological instincts and the archetypes, which he identifies as the two primary poles of human experience. While these two forces might initially appear as opposites, Jung argues that they are fundamentally linked through the concept of patterns of behavior. He suggests that just as animals are born with innate, instinctual patterns of action, the human psyche possesses innate, archetypal patterns of perception and imagination. These archetypes act as the spiritus rector, or the guiding spirit, of the human intellect, providing the structural blueprint for how we interpret the world and organize our experiences into meaningful narratives. To validate the existence of these universal patterns, Jung turned to the clinical analysis of dreams, fantasies, and spontaneous artwork produced by mental patients. He observed that even in cases of severe psychic fragmentation, the imagery produced was not a random or chaotic assortment but instead fell into well-defined themes and categories. These motifs were found to correspond directly to universal mythological themes, such as the hero's journey, the Great Mother, or the Divine Child. Jung deduced that these motifs are not learned through cultural education but are impulses from the collective unconscious, archetypes that structure the various psychological functions and give rise to the commonalities found in human culture and religion throughout history. Jung employs the metaphor of the electromagnetic spectrum to illustrate the structure of the psyche, placing the physiological instincts at the infrared end and the spiritual archetypes at the ultraviolet end. In this model, the instincts provide the raw driving energy and biological necessity, while the archetypes provide the form and spiritual meaning. It is the pressure of instinctual drive that forces archetypal contents out of the collective unconscious and into the field of consciousness. However, Jung is careful to distinguish between the archetype in Psyche, the archetype in itself, and the archetypal representation. Just as we cannot see ultraviolet light with the naked eye, the archetypes themselves are transcendental and unknowable. We only experience their effects when they are translated into the images and symbols mediated by the unconscious. Ultimately, Jung concludes that both matter, represented by instinct, and spirit, represented by the archetype, appear within the psychic realm as distinct qualities of our conscious experience. He posits that the ultimate nature of both poles is transcendental, existing in a realm that lies beyond our direct observation. Because the psyche and its contents are the only reality we experience without a medium, it serves as the essential meeting ground where the biological and the spiritual are integrated. This perspective shifts the focus of psychology from a purely materialistic or purely idealistic view to a holistic understanding of the human being as a bridge between the physical and the metaphysical worlds.
Number 193 on the nature of the psyche, general considerations and prospects, paragraph 216 to 226.
In this concluding section, C.G. Jung reflects on the critical role that psychology plays in the future of human existence. He observes that psychology occupies a unique position among the sciences because its object of study, the psyche, is the very instrument that makes all other scientific endeavors possible. Consequently, any shift in our understanding of the psychic factor essentially transforms our entire worldview. Jung argues that the integration of unconscious contents into consciousness is not merely an academic exercise but a necessary evolution for the survival of the species. By becoming aware of the hidden forces within, humanity can move away from a naive and dangerous reliance on the ego alone. Jung identifies a profound crisis in modern society, noting that individuals have become too closely identified with the collective conscious, the prevailing social norms, political ideologies, and cultural expectations. This over-identification leads to a psychological one-sidedness, as the contents of the collective unconscious are neglected and repressed. This imbalance leaves the modern individual vulnerable to various mass-isms, such as totalitarianism or extreme nationalism, which act as psychic contagions. The catastrophe of Nazi Germany is cited as a primary example of what happens when a collective fails to recognize the archetypal forces erupting from the unconscious, allowing them to manifest as destructive political realities. Historically, medieval man was shielded from such psychological collapses by a robust religious faith. Jung suggests that traditional religious structures functioned effectively because they provided a symbolic framework for the ego to relate to the vast powers of the collective unconscious. With the decline of traditional faith in the West, modern man lost his link to this psychic reality, leading to the rise of sophisticated political and social substitutes. Because religious ideas have their origins in universal archetypes, Jung believes that psychological health can only be restored by re-establishing a connection to the collective unconscious. This is achieved through the assimilation of its contents into the conscious mind, ensuring that the psychological functions are balanced and whole. The culmination of this psychological labor is a process Jung terms individuation, which he posits as the ultimate goal of his psychology. Individuation involves the gradual realization of one's unique potential through the integration of the shadow, the anima or animus, and the archetypes. However, Jung warns that this journey is fraught with peril and requires specific conditions to be successful. If handled improperly, the encounter with the collective unconscious can lead to a pathological inflation of the ego or a complete psychic fragmentation. Despite these risks, the pursuit of wholeness remains the only viable path toward a stable and resilient human future. Would you like me to describe the specific pathological turns Jung warns about during the process of individuation?
Number 194 on the nature of the psyche, supplement, in C.G. Jung, Volume 8, paragraph number 226 to 234.
In this supplemental section, C.G. Jung addresses the methodological challenges of analytical psychology by drawing a sophisticated parallel between the study of the psyche and the field of atomic physics. He defends the theory of archetypes against the criticism that it is merely a speculative philosophy, asserting instead that it is an empirical construct developed to explain the observable effects of the unconscious. Just as a physicist cannot see an atom directly but can infer its properties from its behavior in a cloud chamber, the psychologist cannot observe the unconscious directly. Instead, they must draw conclusions based on how the unconscious manifests through dreams, symptoms, and various psychological functions. Jung highlights a significant epistemological hurdle shared by both psychology and modern physics, the observer effect. In the study of the psyche, the observing consciousness is not a neutral bystander. Its very act of attention produces a reactive effect in the unconscious, thereby altering the objective reality of the phenomenon being studied. This reciprocal relationship suggests that the observer and the observed are inextricably linked in a participatory reality. Because the unconscious also exerts a continuous influence on the conscious mind, Jung argues that we cannot definitively categorize the archetype as a purely psychic entity, as it seems to operate according to laws that transcend our standard definitions of mind. Furthering this radical inquiry, Jung points to phenomena such as telepathy and synchronicity as evidence for a psychically relative space-time continuum. These events suggest that at a certain deep level, the psychoid level, the boundaries between the internal mental world and the external physical world begin to blur. Jung conjectures that the psyche and matter may not be two entirely separate substances, but rather two aspects of a single underlying reality. He hypothesizes that the psyche touches matter at some point of origin, and conversely, that matter may contain a latent form of psyche, a concept that challenges the traditional dualism of Western thought. Ultimately, this supplement positions Jung's work at the frontier of a new scientific paradigm that seeks to bridge the gap between the subjective and the objective. By recognizing the limitations of our observing consciousness, we gain a more humble and accurate perspective on the mysteries of the soul. Jung's comparison to physics serves to legitimize the study of the invisible, suggesting that while the ultimate nature of the archetype remains transcendental and unknowable, its impact on human life is as real and measurable as the forces governing the physical universe. Would you like to explore how these reflections led Jung to his collaborative work with the physicist Wolfgang Pauli on the concept of the unus mundus?